A good vach, Shavua Tov, a good week to you, my holy sisters and brothers. It's late on a Saturday night in the summer, and here we are learning, starting the week off right. Yasher Koach, may you be strengthened to start many more weeks with some beautiful learning. Let's light up the darkness. And who is joining us on a Saturday night? Lindsay in Cincinnati, Sharon in New Jersey, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Paul in the Great Northwest, Nancy in North Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, Miriam says Shavua Tov, Paula says Shavua Tov, Lord Chick in Turkey. Welcome from Turkey, Lord Chick Victor, and Franco from Trieste, Italy. Welcome, my friends. Great to have you with us. Yitzhak in Kansas City, Aoife in Florida. Right, so we have a compact and really interesting daf tonight. Let's get into it. We are in Tractate 14 of the Talmud, Yevamos, the laws of levirate marriage. We're nearing the end. This is chapter 15, Mishna number 3. We pick it up at the bottom of page 116b, and tonight's daf is page 117, Kuf Yud Zayin. Mishnah number 3, Beis Shammai say, a woman who testifies that her husband died may marry and take the money guaranteed in her marriage contract. So we've been discussing this case, some different aspects of it, that a man and a woman went away on a journey, for example, and she comes back and reports to the court that her husband died while she was on this journey, and she's the sole witness that he died. Normally, we don't allow anything to happen on the testimony of a single witness, but the sages decreed so that women wouldn't be stuck waiting endlessly for a husband, as we saw in chapter 10 in the case where the husband just went away by himself and a single witness came back and testified that he died. So they allow her to remarry so she can get on with her life. Because otherwise, if it was only on the basis of two witnesses and two witnesses didn't come forward, she could never get married again. If no witnesses come, she's still in that position. But if one witness comes, she can remarry. She takes on a risk that if her husband actually is not dead and comes back, after she remarries, she's going to have to leave that second husband, and she's going to be prohibited to the first husband, and that's a terrible situation. So presumably she's going to meticulously investigate what happened. Here in chapter 15, we're seeing that even if the single witness is the woman herself, in which case where the problem is she could have bias, since her own outcome, her own fate is so heavily dependent on this testimony of herself that the husband died. Nevertheless, we allow her to remarry unless there's reason that her testimony, either that she might be lying or that in her bias she might be making a mistake. And so, for example, if the couple was fighting before they left, or they went to a war zone and she saw something terrible happen, but she didn't see the husband's dead body, but she might have assumed that he died, or in a rock slide, or an outbreak of snakes, or plague, or famine, etc. We've seen these other examples. Now, here in Mishnah number 3, it's that same case. She's the sole witness. She says, my husband died. Another aspect of a marriage ending is that she receives the payment from the husband's estate from the ketubah. Right? Maybe she's not his heir, but she is going to receive the marriage payment. So Beis Shammai say, even if the only knowledge we have of this husband dying is a single witness, she receives the ketubah payment, the payment of the marriage contract. And the reason why this would even be an issue, we're allowing her to remarry. Why would we not allow her to receive that payment? Because, okay, they made a decree that a woman can remarry based on the testimony of a single witness, even if it's herself, but does that decree also encompass a financial question, like the ketubah payment being made? Beis Shammai say yes. Beis Hillel say she may marry, but she may not take her marriage contract payment, as qualified witnesses are required for monetary matters. 2 qualified witnesses. Beis Shammai said to them, if you have permitted a woman potentially forbidden to him, which is a stringent prohibition based merely upon her own testimony, I mean, you're allowing her to remarry, which risks that if her husband actually is alive and now she goes with this other man and has a child, that child will be a mamzer. That's a terrible outcome, and normally would be very stringent about such a thing. But because we want to make sure that a woman is not stuck waiting for a husband forever that never comes home, they created this leniency. So if in an issue which involves such high stakes as creating a child who's a mamzer, you allow her to remarry on the testimony of a single witness, why wouldn't you also pay the marriage contract, which is a much lower stakes kind of issue, as the money could always be returned if the husband came back? Beis Hillel answered Beis Shammai, this is no proof, as we find that brothers do not come into the inheritance from the deceased brother based on her testimony. Evidently, though this testimony is accepted with regard to prohibited sexual relationships, meaning she can remarry, it is not effective the testimony of a single witness in monetary matters. Beis Shammai said back to Beis Hillel, but we can learn this law from the scroll of the marriage contract, as every husband writes for her that if you marry another man, take what is written for you in this contract. And this shows that her right to receive the money of her marriage contract is dependent specifically upon her eligibility to remarry. In other words, if her marriage ends, she can go and remarry. And if her marriage ends, she receives the payment in the ketubah. And Beis Hillel retracted their opinion and decided to teach in accordance with the opinion of Beis Shammai. It doesn't say so here, but this may be one of the examples that led the sort of voice of heaven to decree in the story that we read in Tractate Eruvin, page 13, that, you know, in terms of these 2 schools of thought, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, who are arguing for so long over so many different issues, that finally the voice from heaven said, these and these are the words of the living God, meaning both schools have made good arguments, but they're in conflict with each other. We need to rule one way or the other. And so the law follows Beis Hillel. Why? Said the voice from heaven. Because Beis Hillel are easy and forbearing, and they state the opinions of Beis Shammai before their own. And I think maybe the easy and forbearing part is that Beis Hillel were willing to say, you know what? You made a good argument. You're right. I'm going to change my mind. And maybe Beis Shammai, who were, and some would say, were a little bit sharper, made actually slightly better arguments, but were so convinced that they were right, perhaps, that they wouldn't retract their opinions the way Beis Hillel does in this Mishnah. Now, the Gemara. Rav Chisda said, I just want to make sure. Yeah, okay. Right, so the Gemara. Now we're on page 117. Rav Chisda said, if the woman entered into Yibum, into levirate marriage, based upon her own testimony, right? Same case. They went away. She came back. She's the only witness. She says that her husband died. Based on this, they allow her to remarry. If the man had died and he had no child at the time, and he had a brother, so now this wife, the widow, and the brother have a yibum obligation. They either marry each other or perform the alternative mitzvah of chalitza. So if the woman entered into yibum based upon her own testimony, her yavam, the brother-in-law that she now marries, comes into the inheritance of the property of his dead brother based on her testimony. When a brother performs yibum after his brother died and he marries the widow, he inherits the property of the brother that he died, and it's essentially also as a custodian for the child that they're going to produce. The first child is going to be the heir of the brother that died. But the brother inherits, and so in this case, he would inherit property based on the testimony of a single witness. So Rav Chisda adds, If Beis Shammai taught their halacha, their law, that she is entitled to her money by interpreting homiletically the language of the marriage contract, the ketubah, will we not teach by interpreting homiletically the Torah itself? And Rav Chisda explains, the merciful one states in the Torah, he shall succeed in the name of his dead brother, Deuteronomy 25:6, which is interpreted by the sages as referring to the right of inheritance of the brother who consummates the levirate marriage. And this man did succeed with respect to the marital relationship as he consummated the levirate marriage based on the testimony of his sister-in-law, the Yevama, that her husband died. Consequently, he takes the place of his brother with respect to his inheritance as well. And that would be further evidence with a ruling like that she would receive the payment of the ketubah after her husband died. And Rav Nachman said, a woman came to the court and said, my husband died. Permit me to marry. The law is that after investigating the matter, they permit her to marry. And also, they give her her marriage contract, as ruled in our Mishna. However, if this woman came to the court and she said, give me my marriage contract, they do not even permit her to marry. What is the reason? Since she came with the money of the marriage contract on her mind, she is suspected of lying, and her testimony is rejected. This sounds a little bit like the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in Mishnah number 2. It's like we're sort of evaluating her emotional state. If she comes to the court and she says, my husband died, give me my money, it's like maybe her motivation is to get the money, and either because she wants the money so bad that it's clouding her thinking, or because she's outright lying, they have reason to suspect and need to investigate further. Whereas if, she's just emotionally coming and say, okay, look, my husband died, free me so that I can remarry, then that sounds more like an actual grieving widow, that they would allow her to remarry and they would pay her the marriage contract. However, the following dilemma was raised before the scholars. If she came and said, permit me to marry and give me my marriage contract, what is the law? Since she mentioned the money from her marriage contract, this shows that she came with the marriage contract in mind. Or perhaps every matter that a person has in his favor, he will say to the court, even if it is not of particular importance. And if you say that the ruling in this case is in accordance with the principle, well, every matter a person has in his favor, he will say to the court. So just the fact that she mentions the marriage contract is not a reason to doubt her, especially after she first said, please permit me to remarry and pay the contract. She didn't lead with, give me my money. We would allow her to marry. But in that case, what if she said, give me my marriage contract and permit me to marry? If she mentioned the money before the remarriage, what is the law? And the Gemara explains the sides of the dilemma. Here, she certainly came with the marriage contract in mind as she mentioned it first. Or perhaps she said it in this manner since she does not know what will set her free. She just listed all the issues that come before her, and it doesn't mean that because she mentioned it first that it was more prominent in her mind. So does the court allow her to remarry in that situation? Says the Gemara, Taiku, let the matter stand. They didn't come to a resolution in this Gemara. Right? And so what is the law? A woman may remarry if she says to the court, my husband died, give me my marriage contract and permit me to marry. However, she does not receive the money from the marriage contract. If she took the money of her own accord, the court does not make her give it back. Right? So if she mentions, allow me to remarry, they're going to allow her to remarry. But if she mentions the money first, they don't give her the money. However, she already took the money, they're not going to take it away from her. And that's how it was resolved. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3. Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 15. All are deemed credible when they come to give testimony with regard to the death of a woman's husband, except, right, we said that she will allow her to remarry based on the testimony of a single witness, unless that single witness is one of the following people: her mother-in-law, the daughter of her mother-in-law, her rival wife, the wife of her Yavam, right, so the existing wife of the brother-in-law who she would marry and become a rival wife to her, and her husband's daughter, i.e. her stepdaughter. The reason is that these women are likely to hate her and will lie to her detriment. And the Mishnah explains, in the case of a divorce, all people, including these women, may bring her bill of divorce and testify that it was written appropriately. What then is the difference between a bill of divorce and testimony about a husband having died? And the Mishnah answers the difference is that in the case of a bill of divorce, the writing proves the accuracy of the testimony. They're just supporting with testimony that this bill of divorce, this get, is legitimate. But if it's about a husband having died and they're the only witness, so then there's no other evidence, right? So it's one thing is to support a document, which the document is before us, but if they are the only evidence, then the court has reason to suspect that although they might be telling the truth, they also might be lying because of the emotional relationship between them and the proposed widow, as it were. Now, they might come to say she is a widow, that the husband died, or they might come to say she's lying when she says that her husband died. I know that he didn't die. Either way, these women are not believed. The Gemara. A dilemma was raised before the scholars with regard to the daughter of her father-in-law, who is not the daughter of her mother-in-law, right? So somebody had two wives and a child by each of them, right? And so we already saw that the daughter of her mother-in-law, right? So who is that? Her husband died. Her husband who died, his mother is her mother-in-law. So we're not going to accept the testimony of the mother-in-law about this because she might have some kind of a feud with the widow. And we're not going to believe the daughter of the mother-in-law. Presumably that's the sister, right? That would be the sister of her husband who died. What about the daughter of the father-in-law, right? So the daughter of the father-in-law who is not the daughter of the mother-in-law, it must be that the father of her husband who died had two wives, right? And so we had the son with one of the wives and this other daughter with a separate wife. Okay, so what about this? The daughter of the father-in-law, she was not listed in the list of these women who are not believed with respect to testifying about a death. So the Gemara explains the sides of this dilemma. The reason that the daughter of her mother-in-law is suspected of lying is because she has a mother who hates her daughter-in-law, right? This widow is the daughter-in-law of the mother-in-law, and that mother-in-law has a daughter. And so that daughter might support her mother in attacking the widow, as it were, testifying against her and not allowing her to be free when her husband died by the testimony of a single witness. So the reason that the daughter of her mother-in-law is suspected of lying is because she has a mother who hates her daughter-in-law, the widow, and therefore the daughter also hates her. But here, in the case of the daughter of the father-in-law, she has no mother who hates the widow, as she is not the mother-in-law's daughter, and therefore she should be deemed credible. Or perhaps the reason that the daughter of her mother-in-law hates her is she says she eats the food that my mother prepares. Here too, in the case of the daughter of her father-in-law, she also says she eats the food of my father's house, and so she might be heavily biased. Right? It's always problematic when you have relatives testifying against relatives. So the Gemara suggests, come in here a resolution from the following Baraisa. All are deemed credible when they come to testify with regard to her except 5 women. And if it is so that the daughter of her father-in-law is also disqualified, then there would be 6 women. So the Gemara rejects this. This is no proof, as perhaps the reason that the daughter of her mother-in-law is disqualified from testifying is that she says she eats the food of my father's house, and if so, the law is no different with regard to her of the mother-in-law's daughter, and no different with regard to her than the father-in-law's daughter. And since the 2 women are disqualified for the same reason, the sages did not list these 2 as separate cases, but it was implied. And so the Gemara raises a contradiction from another source, but isn't it taught in a Baraisa apart from 7 women who are not trustworthy? Now the list has grown to 7. Apparently, the rabbi of the Baraisa added the daughter of her father-in-law as a separate category. And the Gemara answers, that ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. As it was taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Yehuda adds also a father's wife who hates her stepdaughter and a daughter-in-law who hates her mother-in-law. So the rabbi said to Rabbi Yehuda, a father's wife is included in the category of the husband's daughter, while a daughter-in-law is included in the category of her mother-in-law. In other words, just as a mother-in-law is suspicious of her daughter-in-law, a daughter-in-law is equally suspicious of her mother-in-law, and they need not be listed separately to establish that they might be biased in giving testimony. And Rabbi Yehuda, who counts them separately, would answer, granted that her mother-in-law hates the daughter-in-law, as she says, she eats the food I prepare. But a daughter-in-law, what is the reason that she hates her mother-in-law? Similarly, granted the husband's daughter that she hates her father's wife, as she says, this woman eats the food that my mother prepared. However, the father's wife, what is the reason that she hates her husband's daughter? And the Gemara asks, rather, what is the reason that Rabbi Yehuda adds these two categories? Rather, his logic is like this. In the case of a daughter-in-law, what is the reason that she hates her mother-in-law? Because she reveals to her son everything that his wife does. And likewise, a father's wife also hates the husband's daughter because she reveals to her father everything that she does, is a talebearer, potentially. In each case, the reason for this hatred, it's not reason for hatred, right? Reason for the possibility of hatred, is different from the reason for the hatred of the other woman. So the mother-in-law or the husband's daughter, and therefore they belong in a separate category. And the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, why do they say that it is not necessary to establish separate categories? They cite the verse, Proverbs 27:19, which is the title of tonight's show. As in water, face answers to face, so the heart of man to man. What does that mean? The same way that, when you look over a still pool of water and you see your face reflected in it, right? The classic image of Narcissus falling in love with his own reflection. But the idea of you're seeing your own reflection in a body of water. So does the heart of one man reflect another. Meaning, if, you put out hatred toward another person, they're going to feel it and they're going to start to hate you. Presumably the converse is also true. If you put out friendship and love toward another person, they're going to feel that and they're going to reflect that back to you. So relationships are mutual. So the rabbis are saying to Rabbi Yehuda, if this mother-in-law is indeed treating her daughter-in-law badly or suspicious of her and, putting out that hatred vibe, so then the daughter-in-law is going to feel that and going to reflect it right back at her mother-in-law, and therefore we don't need to list those categories separately. And the Gemara asks, and Rabbi Yehuda, why doesn't he rely on this verse? Rabbi Yehuda would retort, that verse in Proverbs was written about matters of Torah. In other words, it means that the more one studies Torah, the more Torah he understands, but isn't necessarily a teaching about relationships. I believe I would have to disagree with Rabbi Yehuda on that, and there may be exceptions, but I think generally what you put out to people gets reflected back. And I'll just say that I'm very grateful that my wife and my mother, unfortunately my mother has advanced dementia now, but while she was herself, my mother and my wife had such a good relationship, and I'm really grateful for that. Rav Acha bar Avia says they raise a dilemma in the west, i.e. in Eretz Yisrael, as opposed to Babylonia, which is in the east, with regard to her mother-in-law who comes afterward. What is the law? This is referring to this woman is potentially, if her husband is established as dead and he left a brother and he was childless, so this is her Yavam, the brother-in-law that she's going to marry. What about the brother's mother? Well, isn't that the same as her mother-in-law? Not necessarily, because Yibum follows paternal half-brothers, right? So these two brothers might have the same father, but different mothers. So if the only person to come and either testify or contradict the testimony to establish that this man had died, if that only person is the mother of the Yavam, the prospective brother-in-law, the brother-in-law who's now the prospective husband through Yibum, if she's the only witness, is she believed or not? So the Gemara, right? So this refers to the mother of the husband's brother. Can this woman testify with regard to the future wife of her son? And the Gemara clarifies: does it enter her mind that if the woman's husband died, the widow will happen before the Yavam, her son, for Yibum? And as the widow, when she then married her son, would eat her food, and she hates her already? Are we concerned about that or not? Now, page 117b. coming here a resolution to this dilemma. If the widow said, my husband died, and afterward my father-in-law died, so she's the only witness testifying both that her husband died and that her father-in-law died. So she may marry based on the fact she's the one who's testifying to two men dying, her husband and his father. She's the only witness. So she brings that testimony. Based on this, she's the sole witness, she herself, that her husband died. Presumably they were at peace with each other and there was peace in the world. So she may remarry and she may receive the payment of her marriage contract. And her mother-in-law is prohibited to remarry. Why? Right? Now she's the sole witness about two men having died. With respect to her own husband, she's believed, and we allow her to remarry. But with respect to his father, her father-in-law, if that man is dead, right, then his wife can remarry. But this is the widow's mother-in-law, right? And we just said that about death, we don't accept the testimony of a daughter-in-law, mother-in-law relationship. So she is not deemed credible to testify for her mother-in-law, as already stated. So the Gemara clarifies, what is the reason that her mother-in-law is prohibited to remarry? Is it not because we say, perhaps her husband did not really die, and she is still this first woman's mother-in-law, and with respect to the first widow, her father-in-law did not die either. And the reason that she says this statement is that she intends to ruin her mother-in-law because she has a bad relationship with her mother-in-law. So the Gemara elaborates, she reasons, later when the husbands arrive, if they come back, she will not come back and trouble me, because if the mother-in-law relies on this testimony and remarries, she will no longer be able to return to her original husband, and she will be out of her daughter-in-law's life. And this shows that there is a concern that a daughter-in-law might lie in order to prevent future family relationships from coming into being. And similarly, a woman should be suspected of lying with regard to her future daughter-in-law. And the Gemara rejects this suggestion. Perhaps it is different there, as the daughter-in-law has already felt oppressed by her mother-in-law. In other words, she is suspected of lying because she had previous dealings with that woman. Whereas in the case of the future mother-in-law, right, the mother of her Yavam, with whom she had no previous dealings at this close familial level, there is no such concern, and consequently the dilemma cannot be resolved from that case, and that's where the Gemara ends on Mishnah number 4. Mishnah number 5. As we get deeper into this chapter, right, the Mishnahs are coming fast and quick, fast and furious. Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 15. If one witness says the man died and the wife married based on this testimony, and then one other witness came and said the man did not die, she need not leave her new husband due to this testimony. Right? She remarried based on the testimony of a single witness. And then it's not that the husband came back, it's that another witness came, a single witness, and said the first witness was wrong, that the husband did not die. Now, in both cases, we don't have proper testimony, only a single witness. So based on the first testimony of a single witness, because of the extenuating circumstances of a woman should not be stuck as an aguna, stranded and not allowed to get on with her life, they allow her to remarry. Now another single witness comes and says, but your husband is alive. What do we do? So he comes and says that your husband did not die. If so, she need not leave her new husband due to this testimony. However, if one witness comes and says the husband died, and then two witnesses come and say your husband did not die, then even though she married based on the first witness, she must leave her new husband. If two witnesses say he died, and one witness says he did not die, the testimony of the two witnesses is accepted, and even though she did not yet marry, she may marry, right? Like Hatlila, ab initio, she can remarry. That's Mishnah number 5. The Gemara says, the reason in the case of one witness contradicted by another single witness is that she already married. However, if she did not yet marry, right? One witness came and said your husband died, so now she's free to remarry if she wants to take on that risk. But then another single witness comes and says your husband did not die. She hasn't remarried yet, now she may not remarry. she may not marry. So the Gemara asks, but wait a minute. Didn't Ula say, wherever you find that the Torah relies on one witness, his testimony is considered complete proof, as though there are two witnesses present here? So if so, the witness who comes and testifies to the opposite is only one witness. Since we allow her to remarry based on the testimony of a single witness, once she got that permission from the court, it's as if there were two witnesses. So why would we say that now if another single witness comes and says, no, your husband didn't die, that would now, upend the matter and she may not remarry? We already said if she did remarry, she doesn't have to leave the husband. Why is it that now she may not remarry since she hasn't remarried yet? And so if so, the witness who comes and testifies to the opposite is only one witness, and the statement of one witness who has no standing in a place where it is and if so, the statement of one witness has no standing in a place where it is contradicted by two witnesses, and since in this case the testimony of one witness is treated like two witnesses, why then may she not remarry even ab initio? And the Gemara answers that this is what the Mishna said. If one witness says he died and they permitted her to marry based on his testimony, and one other witness later came and said he did not die, she does not leave her initial permitted state, i.e. the permission she was granted to remarry is still in force, and she may marry ab initio. So she can, based on that single witness, and even if a single witness comes and contradicts, it's not going to prevent her from remarrying. Now the Mishnah taught that if one witness says he died, and two witnesses come and say he did not die, then she must leave her new husband. And the Gemara asks, well, this is obvious, as the statement of one witness has no standing in a place where it is contradicted by two witnesses. But the Gemara answers, no, it is necessary in a case of people disqualified for giving testimony. In other words, the Mishnah is referring to two people who are generally disqualified from serving as witnesses. In the case of a missing husband, however, their testimony is accepted in contradiction of the first qualified witness. And this is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah, as it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Nehemiah says, wherever you find that the Torah relies on one witness, follow the majority of opinions, even if they are disqualified. And the sages established the testimony of two women against one man, in this case, like the testimony of two men against one man. Recall that in ancient patriarchal society, women were not qualified to be witnesses except in exceptional circumstances. This is one of those exceptional circumstances where a woman's testimony is treated like a man's testimony. So, if it was two women against one man, you might think that the two women don't prevail, but in this situation, they do. So the Mishnah is teaching that even if the first witness was qualified to give testimony, his account is negated by the statements of the two disqualified witnesses who contradicted him. And if you wish, say, anywhere that a qualified witness came initially and testified that the man died, even if 100 women came and contradicted his account, they are considered like one witness and cannot negate his testimony. However, here it is speaking of a case where a woman came first, and they relied on her testimony to release the wife, and afterward two other women came and contradicted her. Okay, now, so the first woman comes as a single witness to free the wife, to remarry. Now two women come and say, no, the husband didn't die. Are we going to say this is two witnesses coming to contradict one witness, and therefore she should not be allowed to remarry, and even she should be forced to leave her second husband? Or are we going to say, well, we accepted a woman's testimony as the single witness so that she would be free to remarry, and she did. Now two women come, it might be two, but the Torah doesn't qualify women as witnesses, so why would we allow this contradictory evidence to come into evidence and force this poor woman, the widow, to leave her second husband? Right? Tough case. Some women, they are considered like one witness. However, here it is speaking of where a woman came initially and they relied on her testimony to release the wife, and afterward two other women came and contradicted her. And the Gemara explains, and you can explain the ruling in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah like this. Rabbi Nehemiah says, wherever you find that the Torah relies on one witness, for example, in testimony concerning a woman's missing husband, follow the majority of opinions, and they establish two women against one woman, like two men against one man. However, in a case involving two women against one man, the latter of whom is a qualified witness, this is like half against half, i.e. they are equal. And the testimony of two women has no advantage over that of one male witness, who is considered like two witnesses in testimony concerning a missing husband. What is the law? If two witnesses, this is where the halacha came out. If two witnesses testify that a man died and one says he did not die, his wife may remarry. And this law applies whether the witnesses were disqualified or qualified. The difference between the case of qualified and disqualified witnesses is that in the case of disqualified witnesses, the court always follows the majority opinion. For example, if 10 women say he did not die and 11 say he died, it is permitted for her to remarry in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah. I'm almost done, so if you got questions or comments, get them in. The Mishnah taught if two witnesses say he died and one witness says he did not die, even if she did not marry, she may marry. Even if she did not yet marry, she may marry. And the Gemara asks, what is the Mishnah teaching us? If you say it is referring to people disqualified from giving testimony, and this is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah, who follows the majority of the testimony. He says majority of opinions, but I think he's saying the majority of the testimonies. Then this case is identical to that of the previous case. The Gemara answers, no, this case was also necessary, lest you say that when we follow the majority of testimonies, this is only when it leads to a stringency. But when the principle would lead to a leniency to permit her to marry based on the majority of the testimonies, we do not follow the majority. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us that there is no difference in this regard, as the majority of the testimonies is accepted, whether this leads to a lenient or a stringent outcome. And that concludes our Gemara on Mishnah number 5. And we'll be picking it up tomorrow, God willing, at 6 p.m., the normal time, 6 p.m. Pacific, with Mishnah number 6 here in chapter 15. Let me see if there's any questions I can answer. On Yevamos 1:17, Sharon, might it not be that financial concerns loom large if a woman's husband dies? Why is it such a damning issue that the wife has financial concerns foremost in her mind, especially if she has children? Great question. And that's why at least one of the opinions said, why would we damn her for that if she's just bringing what's on her mind? So you would think, why? Because maybe that's not even maybe she's not looking to remarry. Maybe she's just looking to get the ketubah paid so that she can, feed her children. It's a really good question. Because they said, right, if she asks for the money first, they don't give her the money and they don't allow her to remarry. Now, I think maybe what they're saying is they're establishing a precedent where that would be sort of the default position. But remember, in these kinds of laws, there's more to it, right? It's not kind of a strict liability type of law. I think what they would say is that requires further investigation. And if she just said that because she's in a desperate situation, she really needs the money to feed herself and her children, then they would understand that. Since the law speaks to her motivation, now they would understand what her motivation is. But if, if it gives the whiff of, she might be lying, and that's what the real issue is, and they're afraid that in remarrying she might create moms or children, that's why they're being so careful. But it's a really good question, Sharon. And finally, Tadeo says, love is stronger than hate. It works well in relationships and other aspects in life. Yes, right? Yes. People who are motivated by hate, there's a tremendous amount of power in that hate. It can create so much damage and destruction. But at the end of the day, I think in life, just like in movies, but in movies are movies, but in life, at the end of the day, I think love will win out. I've seen that in my own life, that sometimes you have to be very patient and play the long game, but love will win out. That's what we've got for tonight. We do have class tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific. Monday, the 4th of July, we have a family conflict. An an event with the family, so I won't be able to teach. So we'll try to do the double daf either tomorrow or on Tuesday, but there won't be class on Monday, the 4th of July. Have a great night, and God willing, see you tomorrow, Sunday.